Good morning and welcome to the London Assembly's Plenary Meeting. In accordance with government regulations, we are holding this meeting as a hybrid meeting with some Assembly members participating remotely. And I'm delighted that we have some participating here from the Chamber for the first time since the pandemic lockdown. It's really great to have people present here in City Hall doing business for Londoners. This meeting has been reconvened from the adjourned meeting of the Assembly held on 23rd of July 2020. Can I ask the Clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm the names of the Assembly members who are virtually present at this meeting, and apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from absence from Assembly members Arnold, Devonish, Curtin and Whittle. Here in the Chamber we have yourself, Assembly Member Shah, Chair, and we have Assemblymember Duval and Assemblymember Pigeon. And with the meeting, joining the meeting remotely, we have Assembly members Bacon, Bailey, Berry, Cooper, Desai, Dismore, Eshalomi, Gavron, Hall, McCartney, Moore, O'Connell, Prince, Qureshi, Russell and Sahota, and Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman. We are also expecting Assemblymember Boff, who I believe Assemblymember Boff has just joined us as well. Apologies, Chair. That's great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to my announcements. I have a few announcements, starting with the Housing Committee surveyed Londoners and found that 1 in 7 people living in London want to leave the city as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee wrote to the London Fire Commissioner to ask what reassurances they have had from the government on the potential impact and implications on the emergency services network without Huawei. The Planning Committee wrote to Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, calling for virtual planning meetings to continue. In the last announcement, finally, last week, the Transport and Environment Committee responded to the Department of Transport's Transport Decarbonisation Plan, call for ideas consultation. Declarations of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out in Agenda Item 2 of the report? Noted.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or other relevant interests where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Assume there are none. Thank you very much. Move on to petitions. Can I ask the Assembly member, Caroline Pigeon, to present the petition listed on the agenda in her name?
Lovely. Thank you very much, Chair. I have a petition of 224 signatures collected by Councillor Avril Coelho from Richmond Borough. And the prayer says, disabled passengers have wide-ranging conditions and many have been shielding for these but rely on public transport for work. Spaces will be limited and many won't be able to stand at stops without seats for long waiting for public transport to arrive, with capacity for them due to limited spaces from social distancing on board. Face coverings on public transport became mandatory on the 15th of June 2020, and removing these to explain a hidden disability puts them at greater risk. This petition calls for face masks for extremely vulnerable registered disabled persons, freedom pass holders, who will have no choice but to use public transport to travel to work as soon as shielding ends, with the same information as the blue card printed on the mask. And I have passed this digitally, but also a hard copy to the clerk. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Can I ask Assembly members to agree to forward the petition to the Deputy Mayor for Transport?
Agreed.
Thank you. Petition update. Can I ask the Assembly to note the response received to a petition presented to the Assembly?
Noted.
Thank you. Right, we move on to the substantive item of the meeting today, and that is the motions that we have before us. I have first motion in the name of Assemblymember Hall, which is TfL nominee passes scheme. Assemblymember Hall, you proposing this?
Thank you, Chairman. I know we debated this last time, but because it didn't go out on air, we're doing exactly the same again. So to reiterate some of the points I made last time, now all TfL staff have free travel, which is equivalent to a Zone 1 to 6 travel card. We understand this and we actually support that for the staff, and it's a perk that we haven't argued against. However, they also have a perk which allows them to give the same travel card to somebody that lives with them. It could be a member of the family, it could just be a friend. And this we regard as unacceptable. Now, in a budget and performance meeting, the Mayor argued that it was cost neutral. Absolute rubbish. Never heard so much rubbish in my life. Of course it's not neutral. It's like saying that fare evasion is actually neutral. No, it's not. Those people would actually be paying their fares if they had to. Now, TfL, as we all know, because it's being run so badly, has got the biggest black hole ever. The TfL and the Mayor have got the audacity of the government, cap in hand, so that the taxpayers, because it's not the government that pays it, the taxpayers are bailing them out. It's all very well to do that, but they need to look at where they're spending their money. This is a perk too far, quite frankly. It's a perk that we should be taking away. We've done estimations of at least £40 million, the cost implications. This is at a time where private businesses are having to make the most court decisions. And these are businesses of theirs that are actually good businesses, but they're still having to make massive, massive reductions in their spend. The fact that TfL continues to go cap in hand, and we suspect they'll do it again, looking for yet more taxpayers' money, is absolutely unacceptable. And I have to tell you, if it comes to losing people's jobs within TfL, which it almost certainly has to, given the financial implications, or flatmates keeping their perks, I know what I'd do, and I, the Labour group, have had time to reflect on this, because what is better, giving £40 million worth of perks to somebody that lives with you, or actually maintaining your job or the job of your colleagues? So I therefore urge everybody this time to, first of all, think about the financial implications of this. Think about the amount that we as taxpayers are going to be having to pay towards TfL, and agree with this motion. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I have Assemblymember Keith Prince to second it. Assemblymember, do you want to reserve your right to speak now, or you want to speak on your?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I second and I reserve my right. Thank you.
Okay, I have indication here. I've got two indications. Can I invite first Dr. Alison Moore, Assemblymember, to speak on the motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. I will speak only briefly, but I want to be clear that my group will be opposing this motion. This is the latest in a long line of Conservative group attacks on the nominee passes scheme. That's clear from looking back at numerous previous mayoral answers and Conservative member budget proposals, where frankly it looks like there has been a bit of creative accounting to try and boost your case. In fact, Gavin Bacon received an answer to a mayor's question in July, making it clear that while TfL were looking at a range of options to reduce costs, removing nominee passes would be unlikely to result in significant additional income. That answer makes it clear once again to you that this benefit is a long-standing part of terms and conditions for TfL employees, and that passes in their current form have existed since 2002 under successive mayors, and further that there is no cost because the number of journeys historically has been a tiny proportion of the 11 million tube and bus journeys made per day pre-COVID, meaning that no additional services need to be operated. In fact, in June 2015, Boris Johnson, when he was mayor, said nominee passes are something that have been part of London's transport and the staff of London Transport, who work very hard and do an incredible job since the 1930s and at least since 1948. To draw attention, to withdraw them would be extremely costly, and it would lead to poor industrial relations. So perhaps you should listen to your now Prime Minister. Frankly, at the time when many TfL staff have been putting themselves out there in the front line during the COVID crisis and continue to do so, to keep our transport system working for Londoners, potentially putting themselves and their families at risk, this motion leaves a very sour taste and is untimely and a damaging attack on our transport staff. I call on all members to reject the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I also have indication from Assemblymember Caroline Russell. You want to come in now, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Green Assembly members will not be voting for this motion. I would like to briefly note that Transport for London nominee passes are part of employee contracts. Therefore, to remove this benefit requires negotiation with and involvement of workers and unions. Further, all previous mayors, including the current Prime Minister, have rejected this request. The last time was in November 2018, when the current mayor responded to a written question on the matter saying, and I quote, "This benefit is a long-standing part of the terms and conditions of Transport for London staff. There is no cost to TfL because the number of journeys is a tiny proportion of the 11 million tube and bus journeys made per day, meaning no additional services need to be operated. All TfL employees and their nominees are expected to act as ambassadors for TfL, helping ensure the security of the system and helping assist our customers where necessary." That's the end of the quote. And yes, the Green Group will not be voting for this motion.
Does any other member want to speak? No, in that case, given the indication we've had so far, I think we'll move swiftly to a vote on this one. Assemblymember Prince, you have obviously...
Chairman, do I not have a right to come back on
No, you have indeed, but before that, yeah, I was coming to that. What I was going to say, Assemblymember Prince reserved his right to speak. So do you want to come in, Assemblymember Prince? No.
Yes, please, Chair,
Sure.
if I may. If I could just take some of the criticisms first. I believe Assemblymember Russell said that these nominee passes are part of the contract. So I think she'll find that Peter Hendy, when he was the chairman of, or CEO, whatever, of the Commissioner of Transport London, made the point that these do not form part of the employees' contract. So I'm afraid, Caroline, that is incorrect. They may be in their terms and conditions, but do not form part of the contract with the employees. Also, I think that whilst Assemblymember Moore made some relevant points, I think at the end she allowed herself to be sort of disrailed a bit when saying that this is an attack on the staff. Of course, this is not an attack on the staff. This is an attack on people who live, such as lodgers, who also qualify for these passes, which is quite ridiculous that just because you happen to live in the same building as a TfL employee that you should be entitled to free travel. But of course the biggest point is that this costs TfL nothing. Well, that's just simply ridiculous. If that's true, that the fact that these people travel for free costs TfL nothing, then how comes TfL made such a massive loss when everybody who was using the buses were travelling for nothing? Because if the argument is, well, the services are running anyway, well, those buses during COVID peak were running anyway, but no one was paying, and TfL made a massive loss. Well, the reason they made a massive loss is because there was no revenue. And if someone travels or uses a vehicle or a train or bus, whatever, then and they don't pay for it, then there are costs involved in that. There is wear and tear. There is the fact that they're denying someone else a place. Now, before COVID, you could possibly make the argument, I don't agree with it, that it was insubstantial. But now, when you've got buses that can only carry 6 people, or buses that only carry 10 people, if one person with a nominee pass gets on that bus, it's very, very likely that they will be denying somebody else the opportunity to travel. On the trains, you know, a carriage only takes 125 people. Well, then again, they will be denying people that ability to travel. So I'm sorry, the point is even more poignant now than it ever has been, because every space is precious. And once we get the school children going back as well, and once they're using the buses, and remembering even with their own buses, there's still only going to be 30 allowed on the bigger buses, then anyone travelling for free will be denying those school children the ability to get to school. So I think, you know, now is the time that really everybody should think about where we are, not where we've been, but where we are, and support this motion and ensure that essential workers and also school children can get to school.
Right, thank you. Assemblymember Hall, would you like to sum up your motion, please?
I would, but thank goodness for Assemblymember Prince. At least we've had a bit of sense there. How anybody can think people going on trains and buses for free doesn't affect the finances at all. They must be the same people that believe in this wretched money tree that they seem to be wanting to claim off all the time. Well, the money tree is actually the taxpayer. The taxpayer is actually going to have to come in and rescue TfL again, while people that live in the same building, as Assemblymember Prince has just pointed out, quite rightfully again, they get to travel for nothing. Well, times have changed, everybody. There is no money tree. There is not lots of money, and TfL are going cap in hand. While they're doing that, they should be looking at things like poor private businesses are having to actually cut their costs. And this is somewhere where we have been saying for a long while, over £40 million, and all the calculations have done, Assemblymember Moore, so very happy to give you those. It's about time a little bit of sense was added here. I don't expect you to agree with this motion, because of course you're never going to anyway, such as these groups. But it doesn't make sense at all. It's about time we all started looking in the public sector of where finances could be powered down, so that we don't have to constantly be looking to the taxpayer to shore up public finances. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Hall. I don't see any consensus here on the motion, so can we please move on to the votes?
Thank you, Chair. I will call each member alphabetically and ask them to indicate whether they are voting for, against or abstaining on this motion. The Deputy Chairman and the Chair are listed last. Assemblymember Bacon.
100% for.
Assemblymember Bailey.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
Got my photograph.
Against.
Assemblymember Boff.
For.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai. Assemblymember Desai.
Against.
Assemblymember Dismore.
Against.
Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Hall.
For.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember Moore.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
For.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Prince.
101% for.
Assemblymember Qureshi. Assemblymember Qureshi.
Still. Against.
Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr. Sahota. Assemblymember Dr. Sahota.
Haven't got your ears on.
Yeah. 105% against.
Against. Thank you, Assemblymember. And then finally, Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
For.
And the Chair, Assemblymember Shah.
Sorry, against?
I can confirm that we have...
No, we have to take your first answer, I'm afraid.
I can confirm that we have 13 votes against, Chair, and 8 votes for, so that motion falls.
Right, thank you. So that motion is lost. We move on to the second motion, which is on family-sized housing in the name of Assemblymember Buff. Would you like to move the motion, please?
Thank you very much. Without saving the Assembly some time, I'm not going to be repeating the same speech that I gave at the aborted meeting. I have, however, helpfully posted a link to that speech on Twitter, and you can get it from my Twitter address and the text of the tweet is, it's for the benefit of Assembly members who may consider opposing transparency in the fight against overcrowded homes today. So if any member is considering voting against transparency today, I'd urge them to have a quick look at that 5-minute speech that I gave last time. So I'm going to spend my time on the Labour amendment. Now, I know it's all very embarrassing for people because this is a Labour mayor, and we've now got a deputy mayor for housing who's done volte-face on his opinions that he expressed as an Assembly member, and now that he's got a better job with more money, he suddenly has changed his opinions. It's always been the case that this Assembly has stood for example, the idea of expressing housing targets and bills through the number of bedrooms, not just through the number of front doors that have been built. Now, the problem with the Labour's amendment, apart from the fact that it does offend against transparency, and it ominously removes a phrase that says to ensure that the mayor provides suitable provision for family-sized homes, it then tries to make some difference, and I welcome some of the things that it says in the amendment, but ultimately it removes that transparency part of the motion that was helpfully amended by the Green Group. What also strikes me about this amendment is that it seems to divert attention away from the mayor's responsibilities, as though the mayor has no money. The mayor has nothing, he's not able to deliver a programme that prioritises family-sized housing. Let's just remind ourselves, the mayor has £4.8 billion of affordable housing funding. He can, and he is in total control of that budget, and he could, if he wanted to, provide an incentive for boroughs to provide those family-sized homes. And yet that's not there. Now, and the responsibility of this Assembly is to hold the mayor to account, not necessarily the government. We can obviously comment on what the government is doing, but ultimately it's our duty to ensure that the funds that are allocated, and we always think that they're not enough, but the funds that are allocated in the best way for Londoners. The original motion as amended by the Green Group was fine. It was simple, it was easy to understand, and it asked the mayor to review his housing policies with a mind to prioritising family-sized homes. The amendment that we've got, which curiously, when you consider they've had a month to consider this, only gets released this morning. I don't know why that was. I don't know what the tactic was for doing this when they had a month to do this, more than a month to do this. The amendment seeks to make the job of the Assembly much more complex. It makes the aims of the Assembly much more complex. I would urge people to vote against this amendment because I think it muddies the water. It tries to let the mayor off from what his responsibilities are to those overcrowded families in London. We still have a situation where, for example, TfL still define a 2-bedroom flat as a family-sized home. And it is delivering record lows in terms of delivering family-sized homes. This is a chance for the Assembly and all those politicians that sit on this Assembly who knock on doors, and we're encountered by somebody who said, I've been on the housing waiting list for 6 years and I've got 3 children in a 2 or 3 bedroom flat. It enables us to at least say, we've done something. And that's what I'm asking the Assembly to do today. Do something.
Thank you, Assemblymember Buff. I have Assemblymember Susan Hall to second this. Do you want to speak now or reserve your right?
I reserve my right. Thank you, Chairman.
Right. As already been indicated, there is a Labour amendment to be moved by Assemblymember Qureshi and seconded by Assemblymember Gavron. Assemblymember Qureshi.
Thank you, Chair. And can I firstly thank the proposer of the original motion for highlighting such an important issue. As we know, many Londoners live in appalling overcrowded conditions, and that was illustrated very well by the Health Committee's report last December, where estimated 370,000 children currently live in overcrowded households. And of course, this has also an impact on the mental health of both the children and their parents. So what we are proposing in this amendment is to strengthen the asks this Assembly makes to tackle overcrowding. The amendment, for example, acknowledges the commitment made by the Deputy Mayor to publish full-size breakdowns of all the GLA-funded housing starts and completions, past and present. The amendment then requests 3 specific actions of the Mayor. First, to consider the dwelling size mix of homes in planning applications. Second, to commission a specific London housing survey. And thirdly, to ensure boroughs have up-to-date needs assessments for use straight away. The amendment also makes an ask of the Secretary of State for Housing to provide the funding needed to build more family-size affordable homes. Because the Mayor by himself is not going to be able to solve this problem. We need central government to do more. And as we all know, family-sized homes are more expensive to build than one-bed homes, and government funding is a key enabler to build the family-sized homes we need to tackle this problem. And it's a problem which has been with us for too long, becoming more apparent during the pandemic. COVID-19 spreads more quickly in overcrowded accommodation. And while we know how challenging lockdown has been, it is made all the more difficult by being unable to leave often very overcrowded flats. So our amendment has been made to strengthen our ask of the Mayor and to call on the government to play its part in tackling this crisis. And it's only by mayoral and government action that we will successfully tackle overcrowding in London. I trust and hope members from all sides will now support this amended motion.
Thank you. Assemblymember Gavron, do you want to speak now in seconding the amendment?
Yes, I would, thank you. I just want to echo a few things following what Assemblymember Qureshi said. But first, I just want to say to the mover, Andrew Boff, I'm very aware of how much he's done to highlight overcrowding, especially in the social rented sector. I remember years ago, Assemblymember Boff, you creating a rapporteurship on just this fact and bringing it to the attention of everyone, for which we're grateful. And I also want to say there's absolutely nothing to disagree with in this motion. It's a very important motion highlighting overcrowding in the rented sector, the importance of families on low income to have access to good, affordable family housing, and absolutely important, the need for the Mayor to review his policies. What Labour has set out to do is to actually go further in a way than the motion is, to remind us, and to remind the Mayor particularly, of what we asked for in the plenary in February on the London plan, which by the way is still the new draft London plan. And in that, if you just take our first amendment, we actually, having united successfully as an assembly to get the strategic housing market assessments level of family size housing in all tenures, but particularly in the social rented sector, in which we doubled it, and therefore got the SHMA amended and successfully negotiated that, to then make sure that the Mayor, who has enormous control in relation to all the schemes that are referred to him from boroughs, or the ones he calls in, and these are the large housing developments, to ensure that in fact proper weight is given when they come before him, and that he can then say, I want the level of affordable housing, the level of social rented family housing that is in the schma, and he can actually say that and use his muscle there. And so that's what that amendment is about. It's going further, making sure that the implementation happens as well. And the second one, I think that is really addressing the Greens amendment, which you, Assemblymember Boff, adopted, which we think falls short actually of what it could be. And in February, at the plenary on the London Plan, we specifically asked the Mayor if he would commission a new London housing survey, a specific London housing survey. And we haven't had one for 20 years. What we need is one that looks at across London, at the conditions of the housing stock, at the levels of housing, of overcrowding and the needs. Now, at the moment, the Mayor relies on the English housing survey with a very small sample of 2,000 a year, and it's generic for the whole country and does in no way deal with the conditions, the specificity, the specific conditions of London's housing need and levels of overcrowding. And he actually agreed at that meeting, or rather his deputy did, to explore this. We now want to get on with ensuring that we have it. Obviously, it can't be a full-blown one, but it can certainly be a much, much bigger sample than 2,000 per annum. So that's the second one, which we think makes more explicit, actually, what is contained in that amendment. Also, our third point is really belt and braces, which is saying, and we want the government to make, sorry, not the government, we want the boroughs to make sure that they're actually tracking needs and levels of overcrowding. And then we come to the final point, which is we're asking the Chair to write to the Secretary of State, who on March the 13th sent a letter to the Mayor, public letter of course, which actually says that his concern about the levels of family housing in London, he wants to see more, and he's directing the Mayor to amend it. Well, we welcome that, and we need to be telling the Secretary of State that we welcome that. But we also need to make sure that the Secretary of State realises that the levels of subsidy, about 20,000 per home, are not going to give us many family homes, and that if we want more family homes, we absolutely have to have this concern about the need for London to have more family housing that the government's expressing actually
Can you please wind up now?
Housing, yes, in the new affordable housing programme that's about to come to the Mayor. So I'll wind up on that, but just say, I hope you can agree that this is about transparency, and it's definitely about making the Mayor more accountable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I know what the answer is, but formally I need to ask Assemblymember Buff whether you are prepared to accept the amendment.
I'm not at this stage.
Thank you. In that case, shall we move to a debate on the main motion as well as amendment? I have one indication so far, and that is from Assemblymember Sean Barry. Do you want to speak now, please?
Thank you, Chair. Right, so this is a really important issue, and it's important that we do debate this in some detail. I really welcome the detail to which Assemblymember Gavron just went in that speech. It's really important that we look properly at overcrowding. I want to thank Assemblymember Boff for bringing the motion in the first place, and particularly for working collaboratively with me and accepting in advance of the last meeting some additional wording from our group. Overcrowding is something that is a cross-party concern. All parties have shared this work in the Housing Committee. It's an absolutely unarguable point that we don't have the data we need to properly measure it, and that has proved a problem in the context of coronavirus, where we've seen the huge impact of overcrowding, both on people's health, their mortality, but also in terms of working at home, their ability to comply with new regulations and new ways of working. This is something we all ought to be agreeing on how to deal with. So moving on to Labour's amendment, I've been petitioning the Mayor to properly measure overcrowding since he first presented Mayor's housing strategy in 2017. We need this data because we need it to have the evidence base for more action and more money and funding from the government. So I was really very keen to make sure that that went into the motion, and I was really pleased that Assemblymember Boff accepted the amendment that I asked for. Now, I will, after some thought now, accept and vote for Labour's amended amendment, which is improved now compared to how it came to us at the last meeting, where the implication was that the new survey work needed to be pushed down onto boroughs. This does need to be done at a strategic level by the Mayor. It does take resources, and I am pleased with the way that the current amendment now gives extra heft to the point that I made originally and actually lays out in detail how this should be done. What I really hope is that the fact that Labour have now come behind this and called for this means that the Mayor himself will now start to do this work and do a proper housing survey for London. Now, I take the point about the fact that the amendment doesn't ask the Mayor to change how he's doing his funding. Actually, where it talks about action from the Mayor, it talks about action in relation to referable planning applications, and the amendment does push back onto the Secretary of State the need to give us more funding in order that the Mayor's funding powers should be used. Now, I don't entirely agree with this, but I think it is a good action for us to write to the Secretary of State to ask for more funding. I think that is really important. It does cost more money to build family-sized homes. We should be being given much more funding from the government to support our affordable homes programme, and we should be given much more freedom, in fact, in how to spend that money as a whole. So I hope that we will be able to take that further action as well if we vote for the amended motion. So yes, the Green Group will vote for the amendment, and we're very keen to see the Assembly pass a strong motion on overcrowding. Thank you.
Right. Is there any other Assembly member who want to speak on this? Nope. In that case, let's...
Assemblymember Hall reserved her right, Chair.
Sorry?
Assemblymember Hall reserved her right.
Yeah, absolutely. Assemblymember Hall, do you want to come in now, please?
Unfortunately, I keep dropping out, Chairman, so I've missed a lot of the debate. The only thing I have noticed that at last Labour want to review the London plan and the housing plan, so well done to my colleague Andrew Boff, who everybody knows is absolutely passionate about overcrowding. So if he's actually managed to make the London Labour Group change their minds, then I'm very happy about that. But I can't comment on other people because I have missed so much. Chairman, thank you.
Assemblymember Qureshi, do you want to sum up on your amendment? Assemblymember Qureshi.
Chair, I've got nothing else to add. I think I welcome the contributions that have been made, and I think our amendment does take on board some of the issues that have been raised already beforehand, and I'm glad they've at least been accepted by the Greens in this vote, hopefully.
Right, thank you very much. Sorry. Are you still speaking or are you finished?
I have finished.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, can we move on to the votes for the amendment? Assemblymember Boff, actually, do you want to sum up on your own main motion before I take the votes?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Look, as Assemblymember Hall has pointed out, this has, if anything, this has shifted the position of the Labour Group, and for that I am very grateful. And I think it's the first time that we will finally hopefully persuade the Mayor to review his housing policies and his planning policies in the light of not just their inadequacy in terms of overcrowding, but the experience that we've had during the pandemic when so many people have been locked into one room with families. A review by any objective observer would be the first thing you would do. So at least we have that change. I will be opposing the amendment only for one small reason, because I can see that the Labour Party have come round to our position in many ways. I will be opposing it purely because it removes the term that the Mayor provides suitable, ensure that all provision is made for family-sized homes. I'm worried about that because it's saying the Mayor is powerless. So I will be advising, I will be opposing this amendment, but do recognise how the Labour Party has changed.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Buff. We do now move to vote on the amendment, please, Rebecca.
I will call members to vote in alphabetical order. They are asked to indicate if they are voting for, against or abstaining. So this is a vote on the amendment in the name of Assemblymember Qureshi. Assemblymember Bacon, your vote.
Against.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Berry.
Sorry, for.
Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismore.
For.
Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Eshalemi.
For.
Assemblymember Gavron.
For.
Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
For.
Assemblymember Moore.
For.
Assemblymember O'Connell. Assemblymember O'Connell.
Against.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Prince.
Against.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
For.
Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
For.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
For.
That is 14 votes in favour, Chair, and 7 votes against. That amendment is carried.
Right. In that case, can we move on to the motion as amended?
Bear with me, Chair. Again, I will call members alphabetically, and they are asked to indicate whether they are voting for, against, or abstaining on the motion as amended by Assemblymember Qureshi's amendment. Assemblymember Bacon.
For.
Assemblymember Bailey.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
For.
Assemblymember Boff.
For.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismore.
For.
Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Eshalemi.
For.
Assemblymember Gavron. Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
For.
Assemblymember Dr Moore.
For.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
For.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Prince.
For.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
For.
Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
For.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
Against.
And Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
For.
That is 19 votes in favour, Chair, and 2 votes against. That motion is carried.
So the substantive amended motion is carried. We move on to the next motion, which is in the name of Assemblymember Sean Bailey, which is on retired police officer health, to be seconded by Assembly Member Steve O'Connell. Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. On the face of it, this motion looks like it's about police officers who have moved on, who've provided a good service for us and have moved on into retirement. But actually, it's more focused on community safety. The stories that retired officers tell are very, very important for retention of officers and also recruitment as well. I'm sure you all agree that the recruitment of new officers into the Metropolitan Police is vital at this time, and of course we want to spread our footprint in the BAME communities, and how retired officers are treated is very important in that vein. So when you speak to the Association of Retired Police Officers and they tell you some of, quite frankly, horror stories that their members are suffering from, you start to wonder, what are we doing as an assembly, as a mayoralty, to look after the officers that serve us for so long and so well in many, many cases? The association recently took on 2 surveys amongst their members to find out what was the situation with their mental health. And over 56% of members said their mental health was affected by their time in the Metropolitan Police. 66% said they experienced negative or uncomfortable feelings about their time served as a police officer. And all of these stories point to the fact that we're not doing enough to support those officers once they've left the service. And again, while that's important, because many of these feelings start when they're actually in the service, which affects their performance. And as London becomes bigger, as our population grows, in these extraordinary times we live now, with lockdown, policing London becomes more and more complicated. So we need a service where the members' service are in fine mental health in order to deliver the service that Londoners want and need. And a police service that's in good condition mentally means it can give a better service to some of our most vulnerable communities who need the extra help, who need officers who feel supported. So I'd commend you all to support this motion, because this is about public safety. It's about helping our police officers survive the job into retirement. It's about making London safer for everybody. So I commend this motion to you all. Hopefully you all feel able to support it.
Thank you, Assembly Member Bailey, for that. Can I ask Assembly Member Steve O'Connell to second the motion, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I very much second the motion. I'll reserve my right to speak at present.
Well, in that case, I have an amendment noted here from Labour Group. Can I invite Dr. Onkar Sahota, Assembly Member, to move the amendment, please?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to say that I broadly and very comprehensively support the spirit of the motion, but my attempt of moving the amendment is to better the motion, is to add value to it, and to recognize that the police officers do a tremendous amount of work for us. When they run towards risk, they protect us, right? And they're the ones who see events which the public are protected from. A study by Cambridge University, the largest workforce study ever taken on the police, found that 1 in 5 police officers had experiences consistent with a post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's 20% of the workforce. And they're dealing with these disturbances and situations which the public are protected from, and these officers go into to address them, exposes them to risks and traumas which members of the public don't see. It's also important, right, that the Mayor, the Metropolitan Police, work with the Home Office and the Department of Health to ensure that police officers are given the support in mental health and given the support that they require. And the astonishing thing from the Cambridge study was that 2/3 of officers with complex post-traumatic stress syndrome either didn't appreciate they had those conditions or realized that they had the symptoms or recognized them. And therefore it's very important that people who are in leadership are able to talk about the mental health issues without stigma and without fear. And I congratulate that the Mayor Sadiq Khan recently did speak about his own mental issues, and it's very important that people who are in public health, in public domain, people who are in leadership roles, are able to speak about their mental health issues and also encourage other people to come forward. So I support this motion, but I want to take it extend further right by saying, look, there should be no stigma attached to mental health. We should encourage people to come forward, and many people don't even recognise they have this condition. We need to help them and support them to deal with that. So my purpose of this amendment was to highlight the importance of mental health, highlight the fact that the stigma is attached to it, highlight the fact that we want to encourage people in leadership roles to come forward and speak about this, and that we collectively work to protect those who protect us. And therefore I hope that this amendment will be accepted by the movers.
Thank you very much for that. I have Assemblymember Unmesh Desai to second the amendment.
Formally at this stage, but reserve my right to speak.
I haven't been notified of any other speakers. Is there anyone who wants to come in on any of the two? No? Can I, in that case, first of all ask Assemblymember Bailey if he wants to accept the amendment?
Chair, thank you, Dr. Sahota. Thank you, Chair. I will accept the amendment. I accept it graciously. It does add to the power of an amendment, and it betters it, and I accept that. So thank you very much. And you're right about mental health. Mental health must be able to be spoken about by people at every level in every job. If someone's having a problem coping, the first mechanism is to talk about that. So I welcome your amendment. Thank you.
Right. Given that, I still, I believe, need to invite Assemblymember Desai, who's reserved his right, whether he wants to speak on the amendment.
No, Chair. I don't need to anymore.
Then, therefore, move on to Assemblymember O'Connell, who also reserved his right to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. I'm very much supportive of Dr. Sahota's very thoughtful amendment. This is an issue that is very important in London and for our security services and emergency services. And it is good for serving officers who are under immense pressure at the moment to know that any issues they will have will be properly looked after and cared for at the time and in years to come. So I very much support the motion as amended, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And can we now formally, therefore, move on to first Dr. Sahota, Assembly Member, if he wants to sum up on his amendment.
Well, Chair, thank you very much for the support, and I think that hopefully we'll get this through unanimously now that we have this been accepted as amendment. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate the spirit in which the amendment has been accepted. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember Bailey, your turn if you want to formally sum up on your motion as amended.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say this. With the National Association of Retired Police Officers survey pointing out that 67% of their members had experienced unexpected thoughts about their experiences, they had nightmares and flashbacks, shows you just how important this situation is, this mental health situation is. And as my colleague said, also serving officers will benefit from the fact that this has been passed, and they understand that we are now seeking to look after them better in every part of their career. But most importantly, Londoners will have a much better police service because we all will be looking after the mental health of everybody in our security services. That keeps us safe. So I just really would like to commend this to all Assembly members to support this motion. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Assembly Member Bailey. I can see a sense of unanimity on this. Is that agreed that the Assembly agrees to the motion unanimously?
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
So that does not require any voting anymore, therefore. Thank you very much. Let's move on to motion number 4, which is in the name of Dr. Alison Moore, Assembly Member. That's on under 18's travel, and it's proposed to be seconded by Assembly Member John McCartney. Assemblymember Moore, do you want to come in now, please? Assemblymember Moore.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. In moving this motion today, I ask every member across this virtual chamber to set aside any amendment and vote for a simple motion that sticks up for our beleaguered young people, supports our hard-pressed low-income families and keeps an eye on the quality of the air we all breathe. We should all resolutely oppose the removal of free universal travel for under 18s because it makes little practical sense, is costing precious time and effort, and will be an attack on young Londoners at a time when they need our help and support most. It will hit the poorest young people hardest, shutting down opportunity, increasing inequality, and putting even greater barriers in the way for students who will be struggling through this school year and beyond to make up for the learning lost after a 6-month gap. Those young people the Prime Minister was ostensibly so concerned were falling behind. This was absolutely not the choice of the Mayor. It was imposed by the government at the 11th hour as a condition of the punitive TfL funding deal. And government are discovering that this politically motivated shoot-from-the-hip plan is proving far more complicated than they anticipated. Just as Ofqual did in the exams debate, TfL cautioned that removing free travel would be complicated and costly to operationalise. But the government were determined to press ahead, arguing that this was the way to get kids cycling and walking rather than using public transport. Of course, we want to see more young people walking and cycling to school, and that will work for some. But if your neighbourhood isn't safe, if you can't afford a bike or have nowhere to store one, or if you live too far from school to make it practical, those just aren't an option. There are already statutory obligations around free transport for some young people, but the rules differ on age and distance. Taking primary school out of the equation and those 11 to 17-year-olds more than 2 miles from school or who live closer but have specific needs, a disability, no safe route to school, could obviously help. But who will adjudicate? TfL? Hard-pressed local authorities and schools? Is it safe to share personal data to exempt some? What will the appeals process be? The terms of any new scheme are not agreed yet, meaning councils will have to do statutory consultation on what will be fundamental changes to their school transport policies at short notice. What will this contorted system cost? The government have postponed the change until after October half-term, but that's just weeks away, and as winter will be setting in with dark mornings and worse weather. To relieve the pressure on the bus system, the Mayor will be trialling an enhancement of the existing bus system. And that will be welcome, but it will not work for all young people. School attendance patterns are complex. Getting TfL to develop a new Oyster card system from scratch to replace the simple flashcard for hundreds of thousands of young people and a complex mix of exemptions for the end of October will be a huge challenge. So what are we left with? Instead of a simple universal free under 18s travel scheme, we have an increasingly complicated set of rules, no quality impact assessments against which to judge them, no clear appeal system, significant time and cost pressures on schools and councils determining eligibility at a time when they can least afford it, and the huge task and cost for TfL in designing and delivering a new card system for what is supposed to be a temporary scheme. And the real scandal? It looks like there will be no provision in the new scheme for families on low incomes. As it stands, it really will hit the poorest, those who can least afford it, who evidence shows have been hardest hit during lockdown, who struggled most with home and online learning, and with the widest gap to make up. Young people are worried that cutting free travel will mean financial hardship for their families, will mean students may struggle to get to school on time, or may just miss school altogether, ending up unsafe on the streets in the winter. In families with multiple children, the financial burden just adds up, and in 50% of households in London who actually have a car, parents may just resort to driving them to school, the car-led recovery we are all trying to avoid. Because if poor air quality was a health problem before COVID, it's now clear it contributes to the damage the virus can do and puts old and young more at risk. Those young people think it makes no sense for the government to have rolled out millions of pounds to protect families from financial impact of the pandemic, and then take away free travel from many of those same families. And they're right. This deeply unfair proposal is costing time and money that frankly neither TfL nor local councils or schools have to spare in the face of the financial tsunami of the COVID crisis. It runs the risk of further disadvantaging what the Children's Commissioner described as a lost generation of children. So why not vote for a motion that says just drop it? Put our young people first, because frankly, this government's big plans on exam results, virus testing, track and trace, local lockdowns, care homes and public messaging have been shambolic. Let's not add our young people's transport system to this list. At a time when cities like Paris are introducing free travel schemes for their young people, let's stop playing obscure political games with the lives and education of ours. Yes, encourage young people to walk and cycle if they can, but every day in school or college will count for them, and we should not be putting further barriers in their way. It's their futures and the future of our thriving city that's at stake. This Assembly needs to speak with one voice and send a clear, unequivocal message to the government to simply put an end to this unworkable, costly and damaging decision. Chair, we need to act, and that's why I'm asking you on behalf of the Assembly and the Mayor to call on government to immediately reverse its decision to suspend free travel for under 18s for the sake of our young Londoners and their education, and I call on all members in this chamber to support that today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Assemblymember Moore. Assemblymember McCartney, you seconding the motion?
Yes, and I want to speak if I can, Chair, and I'm afraid, but I suspect many people will be repeating what my colleague Alison Moore has said just now, because this is a really important issue. The under 18s free travel and travel concessions were introduced by a Labour mayor and have been supported by subsequent mayors, and they give our children and young people opportunities. It allows them to explore their city, to visit our wonderful world-class institutions, to increase educational opportunities and to broaden their horizons. It has been a great success. It was also brought in to reduce congestion, to get children out of cars and onto public transport, and it worked. It is one of the most important investments this city and the GLA, and by the GLA I mean the Mayor and all Assembly members, have made in our children and young people. It is part of our offer to our children and young people, and it says we value them and we want you to play a full life. We want you to play a full part in our city's life, and it is just plain wrong to take this away. It also sends a clear signal to our young people, whether it's intended or not, that this government doesn't value them, that their voice and their needs are not important. And now more than ever, we should be investing in our young people, not taking away opportunity and adding other financial burdens to many struggling families. And I think this government has given out mixed messages as to why they want this proposal. Initially, it was to keep school children off the buses during the pandemic. But as most children and young people haven't been attending school since March, this has not in fact been an issue. And in any event, TfL restricted the numbers on buses and tubes, so there have been no issues of overcrowding with regards to children and young people to date. And with pupils returning to school this week, TfL have done a great job in putting on additional buses onto those busiest school routes and have made many buses school children only. And there's been a Herculean effort from London councils and schools working with TfL to shift school start times to avoid the work rush hour. And there have been strong messages encouraging children to walk and cycle to school where possible. And that surely must be the correct response. The incorrect response is to make it harder for pupils to get to school and to play a part in our city. TfL have also stated that it's technically difficult and it's not been possible to implement in September as the government requested, and those technical and administrative issues have not been overcome. There is no system for administering this in London. London councils, cross-party, are united in opposition to this proposal. They do not have the resources or personnel to administer this scheme. They do not hold the necessary data on who will be entitled to free travel, and they have expressed to me their particular concerns about vulnerable children getting to school, which can often be very difficult in normal circumstances. They are also concerned about children accessing other youth activities, such as youth offending teams, out-of-school activities, and so on. Now, the government now want this implemented by October half term, when the clocks go back, when it's dark in the morning and the late afternoons for many pupils, and when the cold and wet weather sets in. The government have also said that by having this concession, the Mayor has missed out on revenue and has suggested that this is the part of the reason that TfL needed a bailout. Of course, most other transport operators have required government funding and have been given it without such conditions imposed. So what could be different? An election, perhaps. But we must all recognise that where over 80% of Transport for London's funding comes from fares, the funding system as it currently stands is unsustainable, and a mayor of any party would have been in exactly the same circumstance. And I would also point out that until the pandemic hit, TfL had significantly reduced its operating budget in this mayoralty as opposed to under the previous mayor, and was on track to break even for the first time this coming year. And I would also point out that the last mayor, now our Prime Minister, was content to have these same travel concessions despite running a much larger deficit. So this financial argument simply does not wash. The government have also said it's not right for the rest of the country to support London's children. But of course this is disingenuous. As Londoners, London taxpayers subsidise the rest of the country. Taxes raised in this city go to subsidise the rest of the country. And it's a point that we often make in many other debates as to why London deserves its fair share of government money. And Paris has recently announced free travel for young people during this pandemic. I'll finish it. It is surely ironic that learning from the success we've had, London's young people have their free entitlement taken away. So my final point really is a plea to everybody to support this motion. The government proposals have backfired. It's united Assembly members. I hope all of us, the Mayor, MPs, London councils, schools, colleges, child poverty groups and young people themselves, all against this ill thought out and mean-spirited proposal. So I hope we will speak with one voice today and support our children and young people and give a clear message that we want to keep because it is the GLA's, free and concessionary travel for young people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So far, I have indication from 4 members who want to speak to the motion. Can we start with Assemblymember Russell, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Green Assembly members will be voting to support this very good motion. Schools are now going back, but nobody can yet tell under 18s in London what is happening to their travel, how much they might need to pay, for what journeys, and whether any school travel might remain free. This is a mess, and it's a mess that the government has made. Now, the Mayor has said that the bailout condition of removing zip cards was attached at the very last minute. Young people's travel has been used as a political football, and this is just outrageous at a time when their futures are on the line. Free travel for young people is about much more than getting into school, as Assemblymember McCartney touched on. It can also support access to work, seeing friends and family, to use our museums and galleries to catch up on the education that has been so hard hit during lockdown. Now, you all know that I support moves to enable more young people to walk and cycle. And that means the government should be giving more money to fill in the gaps in the walking and cycling budget. And I've written to Grant Shapps to make these points. But cutting access to public transport may be more likely to get young people into their parents' cars than onto their bikes. The Green Group will support this motion, and we call on Grant Shapps not to steal free travel from young Londoners just when they need it most.
Thank you very much. The next one on the list is Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm very happy to support this motion today, and I think it's highly regrettable that this policy is being forced on London by central government. And it's not a policy that will even save that much money. There will still be statutory provision for some school children, and those children under 10 are going to still receive free travel. But there's going to be a huge amount of public money, tens of millions of pounds will have to be spent on administering this new scheme. And getting it up and running for the beginning of November is going to be an administrative nightmare. Consultations have to take place in term time. Each individual application will have to be assessed and whether or not a route to school is safe or not. Absolute nightmare. And this policy is based on petty politics and, quite frankly, arguments that rest on ignorance. For example, we've heard claims that free travel and discounted travel for children and young people exists solely in London. That's just not the case. Other parts of the UK have free and discounted travel. Scotland has recently introduced free bus travel for all children and young people. Liverpool, Manchester, county councils such as Kent and Cornwall have discounted travel schemes for under 18s as part of their programme to encourage modal shift. And as we've already heard from the Deputy Mayor, Paris is introducing free transport for under 18s to try to get more people onto public transport. And it's also been claimed that the government wants this policy in place to stop people using public transport at peak times. But many of these journeys for after-school activities and so on will not be at peak times. And there are other plenty of policies in place around walking and cycling, which young people will take up as well. But schools and colleges are planning flexible opening hours, spreading demand on public transport, and as we've heard earlier, TfL have introduced specific buses on key routes serving schools. And this policy is going to impact low-income families the most. It's going to severely affect young people returning to school, especially colleges where young people travel a greater distance, trying to catch up on their education and training. This is a new barrier for them and their family. And I think it says a great deal that an equalities impact assessment still has not been undertaken and published, despite this policy being announced back in May. And, the foolishness of this policy is best summed up by academic research that the government claimed justified this decision. Sarah Olney MP managed to get hold of this research report through a parliamentary question. And far from justifying the policy, the research demonstrates the very opposite. It concludes that free bus travel scheme for young people has encouraged greater use of bus transport without significant impact on their overall active travel. Qualitative evidence for benefits in terms of health, such as normalisation of bus travel, social inclusion and opportunities for independent travel. And the report also revealed that the policy had reduced road traffic casualties, increased bus travel, reduced car travel, while not reducing levels of active travel in the city. So it's a good policy, and it's one that we should all be supporting. And it categorised the policy as high value for money. We've seen the Child Poverty Action Group, we've seen Travel Watch powerfully demonstrating the harmful impacts ending free travel for under 18s will have. London councils are rightly speaking out on this. Many London MPs have signed an early day motion on this, opposing the policy. I think 21 had signed it as of yesterday. And most importantly, young people have spoken. It says a great deal that just one of the many petitions that exist is by Joshua Brown-Smith from Lewisham. His petition has attracted 208,428 signatures as of yesterday. Ending free travel for young people is harmful. It will harm those most in need, and it's a policy we must oppose. We must all oppose. And I hope all Assembly members will support this motion today.
Thank you very much. Next one on the list is Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by saying, quite clearly, I absolutely support free travel for the under 18s, and I was hoping that we could come to some agreement to have a motion that was not just politically motivated, but actually wanted to achieve something for the young people of London. Unfortunately, Labour want to use this motion just to have a pop at the government, which I think is a shame. And I think because it's factually incorrect in some of the issues that it raises, then I think it makes it very impossible for us to support it, which is, again, it's very regrettable, because I think we do need to send a clear message that under 18 travel should be supported. Having said that, of course, what this motion doesn't do and doesn't recognise is the trial, and I think it's a very good idea by the Mayor and TfL to run this trial of extra buses during the peak period to see if we can mitigate the problem. Because the fundamental problem here is not so much about money. I think that's a bit of a red herring. It's very much about capacity. As we know, before lockdown, a normal double-decker bus could carry 87 passengers. There, give or take 2 passengers, depending on the design. At the moment, most of you who've had the pleasure of riding on the buses will have noticed that the maximum capacity for any bus at the moment is 30. For single deckers, it can be as low as 6. We also know that prior to COVID, there was the number of school children on a bus in the peak period amounted to around 55%. So if we look at 55% of 87, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that 49, which is roughly 55% of 87, doesn't go into 30. So you couldn't fit all the school children on the buses if you wanted to. But as I've said, the trial of these extra buses is very good, and that could mitigate the problem. But the fact is, if it doesn't mitigate the problem, then we are going to have a real issue. We're going to have a situation whereby essential workers who need those 30 spaces on the buses won't be able to get to work. And there are many essential workers, like my wife, who care for children. She must get to work on time, otherwise those children do not get the support that they need. So I wanted to put in an amendment that would have recognised this and suggested to the Assembly that we should, by all means, write to Grant Shapps, by all means ask for this to be rescinded, but we should at least wait a few weeks to see exactly how this works, because we run the risk, don't we, of having a situation where we can't accommodate all the young people on the transport system, and that we have complete mayhem. And it may even be that if we can't fit all the young people on the buses, for example, the Mayor himself might have to consider alternative provision. So I think we would have been wise to wait just a couple of weeks to see how this beds in. And if it is successful, and I very, very much hope that the Mayor's initiative of laying on extra buses is successful, then of course we would all unanimously write to Grant Shapps and say, hey, come on, you know, we can make it work, therefore absolutely young people should be able to travel for free. But of course, if it's an unmitigated disaster, then it's not going to happen. So I would have asked really that we have a delay in writing and see what the outcome of the trial is before we go ahead with this. And for that very reason, I cannot support this motion, unfortunately.
Thank you. Last on my list is Assemblymember Qureshi, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement, obviously, with the motion and most of the points made, and I'll try not to replicate all the points that many have made already, but just add that this, for me, harks back to when, in my school days, when we had Fair's Fair in the early 80s, and it was challenged by Bromley Council. Now, Fair's Fair got me on the tubes, and it was almost straight away denied when the Bromley Council challenge was successful in the courts. If we're going to get a whole generation of young Londoners using public transport, free travel is part of the deal that you have to offer. And I think they can and rightly expect this as something that they can grow up with and expect all the way through their adult life when they start paying for it. I just think there are some lessons to be learned from going back to the 80s, and I'm sure that those who've been around a bit longer will make the most of that comparison. The other fault is it also, I mean, it undermines a lot of good work that's been done over the last 10, 15 years, certainly through TfL and local authorities. I suspect a lot of parents are going to do the school run now. It suddenly makes sense to do that if you've got 2 or 3 kids, certainly of primary school age, and we'll have all those issues that we've had in front of primary schools over the last few years coming back up. For all those reasons, I think we need to maintain free school travel, not only for kids in primary schools, but secondary schools, for them essentially to not only get to school, but to appreciate the city they live in also outside of school time.
Right, thank you for that. I haven't got any more indications for anyone wanting to speak to the motion. In that case, I would, can I ask Assemblymember Moore if she wants to sum up on the motion, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I would like to thank fellow Assembly members, particularly Assembly members McCartney, Russell and Pigeon in particular, for adding real detail and depth to the debate this morning. And I thank you for that. You said many of the things I wouldn't have had time to say. And it draws, firstly, the importance to young people, both in school and beyond school, of that universal free travel, and travel that is becoming more supported by other cities in Europe and across Britain, because it is so valuable for our young people and their broader education, engagement and motivation. Assemblymember Prince, I am puzzled to hear you say on the one hand that you support under 18s free travel. Firstly, it's simple, vote for the motion. You say that it's politically motivated, but honestly, this is frustration with a system that actually a proposal that just shouldn't be on the table and is proving very complicated and frankly is unravelling. So we want to make sure that your voice is with us on that. Just call a halt to it. We don't have the few weeks to see how the trial of expanded school buses goes. Yes, it will help. But the reality is that the plans to enable and enact this under 18s travel scheme has to be being done now if it's going to be brought in from November the 1st. And that is putting real pressure on schools, on TfL, on local authorities. So let's be absolutely clear. They have a job to do in managing their budgets and providing educational support, not for having to put themselves through hoops with an ill-thought-through scheme like that. And finally, I just want to point out that young people are more acutely aware of the challenges COVID is presenting than many adults. Their voices have been heard loud and clear, individually and through the Child Poverty Action Group and Travel Watch. And it's very clear to me that there are some very intelligent young people out there. We need to trust them to be sensible because, quite frankly, many of them are currently, or will be as this week goes on, observing far more sophisticated rules in school than most adults are in their lives or in their workplaces. We need to trust young people to be sensible. Hear them talk about the worries about infecting their grandparents. You know, they do understand this. So let's actually give them the grace and the support that they should have by continuing their free, universal, under 18s travel that will not mean that we are punishing the poorest children in London, and trust them to make it work alongside us. We do not have time to mess about with this. We need to make a decision, write to government and get them to row back now. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Assemblymember Moore. Can we now put the motion to the vote, please?
I will call members to vote alphabetically, and they are asked to indicate if you are voting for, against or abstaining. This is in relation to the motion in the name of Assemblymember Dr Moore. Assemblymember Bacon, your vote.
I'm abstaining, Chair.
Assemblymember Bailey.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
For.
Assemblymember Boff.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismore. Assemblymember Dismore.
For.
Assemblymember Duval. Assemblymember Eshelemow.
4.
Assemblymember Gavron.
4.
Assemblymember Hall.
Abstain.
Abstain.
Assemblymember McCartney.
4.
Assemblymember Dr Moore.
4.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
4.
Assemblymember Prince.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Qureshi. Assemblymember Qureshi. Was that 4, Assemblymember? Thank you. Assemblymember Russell.
4.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
4.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
Abstain.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair. That is 15 votes in favour, Chair, and 6 abstentions, so that motion is carried.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next motion, which is on police funding, to be moved by Assemblymember Desai and to be seconded by Assemblymember Duval. We've also been advised of an amendment by conservative groups, so would be useful if Assemblymember Desai can indicate if he's prepared to accept the amendment to his motion. Assemblymember Desai.
Chair, no, the amendment at this stage is not accepted. Chair, so can I move my motion now?
Yeah, of course.
In the months leading up to the coronavirus lockdown, I'm sure that for all members here today, reducing the levels of violence on the streets of our capital was one of their top priorities and very possibly their number one priority. Over the period where the strictest quarantine measures were in place, there was a significant reduction in most types of crime, including violent crime. There has now, however, been a noticeable increase in crime again over the past 3 months, as most restrictions on people's movements have all but been removed. Metropolitan Police officers have been working hard throughout the pandemic to try and make a lasting impact on reducing violent crime, including through the introduction of the new violence suppression units. But the Met now faces a serious uphill challenge as we move towards the end of summer, if levels of violence are to be kept lower than before the coronavirus lockdown. In the wake of George Floyd's tragic murder in the United States, there's arisen a movement in that country to defund the police. Whatever the merits of that approach in the United States, it is not one that is needed here. Quite the opposite, indeed, I would say. Over the last 10 years, we've seen firsthand in London the damaging effects of what happens when police funding is recklessly removed. Where there are issues of disproportionality in the Met's policing methods and its relationship with BME and especially Black Londoners, we can and will address them through vehicles such as the Mayor of London's proposed action plan for the Met. Reducing police funding would do nothing to address these issues and only make our streets less safe. Indeed, there's been a direct link between the over £850 billion worth of cuts that the Conservative government imposed in the Met and the rising levels of crime, and particularly violent crime, witnessed in recent years. We must keep in our mind what impact the Met losing such vast sums of money has had on Londoners, particularly on the ability of the police to prevent and respond to incidents of serious violence which have been damaging our communities for too long. As you all know, the Mayor has been plugging the gap left by government underfunding of the police, upping the contribution from City Hall to the Met from £686 million in the year before he arrived to over £1 billion this financial year. This has led to over 1,000 new police officers on our streets and prevented police officer numbers from dropping to dangerously low levels. Before the pandemic struck, the government had begun to recognize that more funding was needed and had pledged to increase officer numbers by 20,000 across the country. London is set to get 1,369 of these officers this year, and while this is still some way of the 6,000 officers the Mayor and Commissioner called for, it is nonetheless a step in the right direction. Police officer numbers are, due to the record investment by the Mayor, now at the highest level for some years. However, it must be noted that the force is still some way of reaching the level of officers per capita that we had in 2010. The new danger and uncertainty we are now faced with, and which, if unaddressed, will undoubtedly impact upon officer numbers and therefore crime levels, is a loss in funding the Met is facing as a result of the pandemic. The estimates that have been provided show a loss of almost £500 million for the GLA group over the next 2 years, with £110 million of this due to impact upon the Met. On top of this, the Met is £11 million down due to having to cover the costs of policing President Trump's visit and the Extinction Rebellion protests last year, as the government has not yet granted the Met is claimed to cover this cost as unique events specific to London. Similarly, the Met is also £159 million short due to the government not fully funding the national and international capital cities grant. And on top of all this, due to COVID, the forces had already had to spend an additional £17 million this year. The police officers I've spoken to about the current funding situation have been very clear. I was at Notting Hill Carnival this week, in Notting Hill this weekend. There was no carnival, obviously. Went on a walkabout, met police officers, went to the operational room, discussed the pressures on the Met with frontline police officers on the day. They say they simply cannot endure a further round of cuts, particularly given the increased pressures we have already seen being placed on officers due to the health, economic and social impact of the crisis. Therefore, we must now see a full compensation by the government for any loss of funding for public services and the Met as a result of the downturn. And let us be clear, this must include covering the full cost of the income loss from the expected drop in council tax and business rates, because these are a crucial part of the Met's funding. And this is why I cannot accept the amendment. The amendment does not address this issue, the loss, the income loss from the expected drop in council tax and business rates. I therefore implore all members here today to support this motion. We only ask that the government stay true to their word and do whatever is necessary to fund our police throughout this challenging time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Duval, you're seconding the motion?
Chair, can I formally second and reserve my right to speak later during the debate?
Right. Okay. In that case, we move to the amendment, which is in the name of Assemblymember Steve O'Connell, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I move the amendment with the preface that I very much support to a degree what my comrade Umesh Desires just very eloquently talked about around the issues facing London policing. The job of London's police has got more difficult over recent years, and going forward it's not going to get any easier. And for the record, I've always supported a fair funding settlement from the government for the Met Police. You will recall, colleagues, that I wrote very happily as chair of the Police and Crime Committee on behalf of the committee to the Home Office only 18 months ago, urging a fair, indeed fairer, commitment on the budget for policing. So I think there's a meeting of minds in that respect. I have no problem at all in urging the government for more funding. We are here to represent Londoners, and we are there to support them. However, and there is always a however here, the motion we have in front of us, whilst, as I've said, I'm supportive in approaching the government, lets the Mayor off the hook. Ultimately, we are here to hold the Mayor to account. He has the responsibility and the discretion to use his budget to support policing. And we know that within his proposed budget, he is proposing to cut the police funding. And Mr. Desire talked about defunding. There's defunding within the Mayor's budget. So whilst I very much do support urging the government for a fairer settlement for the Met, we must not let the Mayor off the hook. We need to be urging both parties, i.e. government and mayoralty, to make sure they do all they can to ensure that our men and women on the front line and elsewhere have enough funding. And I don't believe that the motion in its first form does that. So yes, let's write to the Home Office. Let's say we represent Londoners. London is not getting a fair deal in policing funding. We need more money, but also we must urge the Mayor to do all he can. He's not doing all he can, and our amendment addresses that. So I would urge colleagues to support our amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. May invite Assemblymember Hall to second the amendment, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It's my pleasure to second. And I must say that I always agree with Assemblymember O'Connell and Desai. All three of us are passionate about policing in our capital, and our amendment does reflect that. What the difference is, we have to remember that the Mayor has a significant budget. He has an £18.6 billion budget. I mean, the public could be forgiven for not realising that, since every time there is an issue, he goes running to the government, screaming for more money. So perhaps he could look at other budgets and tighten up other budgets in order to make sure that one of the most important things he does in London is to police it. He is in charge of the Metropolitan Police. So perhaps we could see an end to, whether it's beach parties, musical ballet, whatever else he puts his money into. He's got three main responsibilities: TfL, which we all know is a disaster; housing, which he's not doing very well on that either; and policing. And he should forget about many other things and make sure he gets his core responsibilities dealt with first. So this amendment puts onus back on the Mayor again, because after all, we are Assembly members, London Assembly members, and it actually specifies that perhaps he should be doing slightly more. And so therefore I second this amendment.
Thank you. Let's move on to the debate on this motion as well as amendment. I have an indication from Assemblymember Pigeon, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I fully support this motion, and I agree it's critically important that government ensures Londoners do not face a further reduction in our police force. And the Met clearly needs more officers to deal with the complex and unique nature, really, of crime in the capital, not fewer. And as I've called for a very long time, the government needs to provide long-term funding settlements to police forces, including the Met. And these settlements, I think, are even more important as we face such economic uncertainty as a result of COVID-19. But I would also flag, and we had discussed this before the summer break, that I would appeal directly to the Mayor to lead by example. I have already made it clear my views about the recent post advertised by the new MOPAC Chief Executive for an Executive Personal Assistant on a starting salary of between £67,000 and £75,000, far more than a police officer. And so the Mayor cannot talk seriously about protecting our frontline policing from cuts when the Chief Executive of his own Office for Policing and Crime is advertising such an inflated and, quite frankly, unnecessary post, particularly at a time when parts of the GLA are facing significant cuts. I will support the motion before us today as it was tabled earlier, but I think the Mayor has got to watch some of these inflated posts, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't have any other member who's indicated who wants to speak to the motion. In that case, let's move on. Can I invite Assemblymember Duval, who reserved his right to speak?
Assembly members, look, colleagues know me for a long time now, and if ever I thought the Mayor was going to shortchange the police, despite being a Labour Mayor and I'm being a Labour Assembly member, I'd speak out about it. The arguments that have been put forward today and in other places just don't add up, right? Don't add up. I thought we might have heard something slightly different from the Conservatives about, well, he could have funded it differently or not. He has actually funded the police. He's funded the police by using the maximum amount that government allow in terms of the precept. He's put additional monies in terms from the business rates. And in terms of the total sums we're talking about, over the years, not even over the years, in a year, probably is over £1 billion of resources that go into policing. Now, that's not just on policing, but he's also doing the other side. We know policing alone and funding policing alone won't solve the crime problem that we face here in London. We need to also fund, and he's put his money where his mouth is and funded anti-crime projects supporting the police's work in areas of need to make sure that funding's there. So that's additional funding that's gone in. The real central point about this is London getting a fair funding settlement. And yes, rightly so, I recognise the Conservatives have spoke up to that. But at the moment, we are being cheated. We are being cheated on police officer numbers and not being treated the same as the rest of the country, despite us being in the most need of some of that support in tackling crime. We need to remind ourselves and go back to 2010 on the policing numbers. If you don't want to listen to the politicians and the arguments for that extra need of police numbers, then listen to professionals, police services and allied academics who say, hold on, this is not right and we need to get to the bottom of those issues. So just let's remind us on that. So there's no way of getting away from the fact that the Mayor is funding it. He may not be funding it in the way that you want. And I recognise the Conservatives have put forward alternative budgets. I don't believe they're sustainable in trying to deliver more resources to the police. If you looked closely at what the Mayor's done, he's mirrored your call for those more resources and done it in a different way. In fact, he's exceeded your Conservative budgets year on year in putting those resources. Now let's just hammer one more myth, the myth that's being created at the moment about what the 109 million that's allocated in the mayoral budget guidance of the cuts that we may face in policing. That's based on loss of council tax, loss of business rates. And look, unless the Conservatives know something we don't know, it's also based on, are we going to get any more support from central government? That's the issue. And is it fair that they support the rest of the police services outside London, but not support us? And there's a touch of the transport debate here about penalising London. And I'll be the first to say, look, yes, you should take some ownership. I believe the Mayor is taking that ownership and doing what he's doing. But equally, there's a partnership issue here, and there's always been a partnership in the way that we've been funding. Government have got to put their bit in, rightly and fairly. On the other issues, look, we can all point to odd bits of expenditure that don't look right. And sometimes I share the views of some of my colleagues and think, hold on, that don't seem right to me, and someone should get a grip and start asking the questions. And that's what we're here to do, and that's what people are doing in the right frameworks. But let's not kid ourselves, much that's important to do, that's not going to solve the policing finance problem that we face here in London. It's the bigger sums, and the bigger sums can only be provided by the bigger partners. If we don't get the business rates, which we're not going to get in the future, and we don't get some of the council tax that we're predicting to get in the future, then it's going to be bad across not just our policing services, but all our emergency services. This Mayor, despite the criticisms from some, has done the right thing and stood by the police service. He will continue to do so.
Thank you. And finally, can I ask Assemblymember O'Connell whether he wants to sum up on his amendment, please?
Yeah, I've heard the debate, and I obviously have an enormous amount of respect for colleagues who have been around policing, indeed even longer than I. But the fact remains that I believe that on behalf of Londoners, we should be up in the ante, putting as much pressure as possible on government and on the Mayor on the safety of Londoners, which, as was pointed out earlier, is the number one issue. We need fairer funding. We need more police in this city. We have different demands from the rest of the country. We all agree on that, and we need both the Mayor and government to step up, hence my amendment.
Thank you. And finally, can we have Assemblymember Desai, if he wants to sum up on his main motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. In light of what Assemblymember Duval has said, I'll be very, very brief. I think he's put the arguments very well in support of this motion. Can I firstly put on record and acknowledge that there's been all-party support from the Assembly in terms of asking the government to properly and fairly fund the Met. I think it's only right that I acknowledge that. Can I just actually talk about frontline police officers? It's been a very difficult summer for the police, to say the least. I've been to Notting Hill for the last 4 years. This is the 5th consecutive visit to the site, and I'm particularly determined to go this year to show my support for frontline police officers. And I'll say, going there, talking to them, visiting the operational room centre, I got an idea in terms of the tremendous pressures that they are under. We talked earlier about the mental health, situation that some police officers face, especially when they retire. But police officers are under that stress right now. Mental health actually builds up. So it was quite an illuminating experience to walk around Notting Hill to talk to frontline officers. But the reason why the amendment can't be accepted is that it does not address the crucial issue of the loss of income from the drop in council tax and business rates. This does affect the Mayor of London's budget. Local government, many of us have been councillors, is under the utmost pressure. These are unprecedented times for everyone, the Metropolitan Police, the local authorities. The cuts that are being made or will be made. And therefore it is only right that we ask the government to fully cover the cost of the income lost from the expected drop in council tax and business rates, which is, as I said, the amendment does not address that particular point. That's why I can't accept the amendment. And I'll urge you to vote for my motion and seconded by Assemblymember Landwell.
Thank you. Can we put first the amendment to vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a vote on the amendment in the name of Assemblymember O'Connell. I will call members in alphabetical order and ask them to indicate if they are voting for, against or abstaining. Vote for Assemblymember Bacon.
For.
Assemblymember Bailey.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
Against.
Assemblymember Boff.
For.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Against.
Assemblymember Desai.
Against.
Assemblymember Dismal.
Against.
Thank you. Assemblymember Duval.
Against.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Against.
Assemblymember Gavron.
Against.
Assemblymember Hall.
For.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Against.
Assemblymember Moore, Dr. Moore.
Against.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
For.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince.
For.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
Against.
Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr. Sahota.
Against.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
For.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
Against.
That is 7 votes in favour, Chair, 14 votes against. That amendment falls.
Right. Can we move on to the main motion, please?
Thank you, Chair. We move on to vote on the motion in the name of Assemblymember Desai. I'll call members in alphabetical order again, and they are asked to indicate if they're voting for, against or abstaining. Assemblymember Bacon.
For.
Assemblymember Bailey.
For.
Assemblymember Berry.
For.
Assemblymember Boff.
For.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismal.
For.
Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
For.
Assemblymember Gavron.
For.
Assemblymember Hall.
For.
Assemblymember McCartney.
For.
Assemblymember Dr. Moore.
For.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
For.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
For.
Assemblymember Prince.
For.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
For.
Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Dr. Sahota.
For.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
For.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
For.
That is unanimous, Chair. In favour. The motion is carried.
Thank you. Let's move on to the last motion on the agenda paper for this session, and that is on unconscious bias in the name of Assemblymember Barry, to be seconded by Assemblymember Pigeon. We also have an amendment from Labour Group in the name of Unmesh Desai, so would be grateful to Assemblymember Barry if she would also indicate whilst moving her motion if she is prepared to accept the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This motion is simple. Our staff at City Hall are required to have regular training and refresher courses in recognising and challenging any unconscious bias they may have. For frontline public servants, in our police and the people who work with them in the Met, it is just as important and arguably even more so that they have the same regular training. Public trust in our police is being eroded by police actions committed consciously or not, and something must be done. This training isn't a magic wand, but at a minimum, making sure officers have the same training as our own staff is a positive step and easily included in action plans. The Police and Crime Committee wrote to the Commissioner on the 4th of June this year about disproportionate policing with regards to coronavirus powers, and also asked about this training. We on the committee have yet to receive an answer, despite the Chair asking for a response by the 22nd of June. When I asked the Mayor in February last year how many officers had received training in unconscious bias, he told me 17,000 officers had. And in July, he confirmed that between 1st of March 2019 and 10th of June 2020, only a further 6,144 officers and staff have had training in over a year. As we have a total of more than 45,000 police officers, staff, PCSOs and specials within the Met, half the Met's workforce therefore haven't had this training. And that progress made in the last year is just 13.5% of the staff newly trained. And we don't have information yet on refresher training, because that would have come in the letter. Now, this motion is not an attack on the police, it's not accusatory, and it is not intended as a finger-pointing exercise. I acknowledge that there are also wider reviews and many more measures that must be taken to really make sure that the principle that the police are the people and the people are the police, to make sure that the people who work in our police service truly serve us as an integrated, trusted and fair-minded part of our citizenry, that needs more work. But this is a practical and positive step that the Met should have been completed by now, and we should push to get this done for every officer, staff member, special and PCSO without any more delay. Now, the Labour amendment, I'm sorry, I can't support it because it adds pointless and poorly reasoned self-congratulation to what is a perfectly simple request to fill a clearly evidenced gap. I can't say to the Mayor, continue along this path, when still fully half of officers and staff have not taken part in a short, simple but important training exercise that can have a big effect on attitudes, on examining your own biases that we all have, and on being more thoughtful about how you treat others in the moment when your biases may have the most sway. I hope the Assembly will pass this simple motion unamended today.
Thank you. Can I invite Assemblymember Pigeon to second the motion, please?
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm pleased to second this important motion today. I asked questions on unconscious bias training in the Met earlier this year and was told that unconscious bias training is delivered to police officers at various stages of their career. And this is very good, but as the motion states, all other parts of the GLA family receive such training on a 2-yearly basis. So I think it's essential that such unconscious bias training is built regularly into training schedules in the Met to ensure that both officers and staff can continue to do the best job possible for the diverse communities they serve in London. And I also believe a commitment for 2-yearly unconscious bias training will help to increase confidence in the police in London. In June 2016, confidence in the police was at 69%. As of June 2019, it was 59%, and I fear it may have reduced further. And with the recent focus and attention from the Black Lives Matter movement and what it's revealed about urgent need to tackle bias in both the police and across our society, coupled with the increased use of stop and search and the introduction of live facial recognition technology in the Met, I worry confidence in the police will fall yet further, particularly with some of our communities. More must be done to increase confidence in our police, and a commitment to 2-yearly unconscious bias training is a first and important step, which will not only help with this, but also demonstrate the Met's firm commitment to tackling bias, something I have not heard so much about recently. I hope all members will join us in supporting this motion, ideally unamended. Thank you, members.
Right, thank you very much. Can we move on to the Labour amendment? Assemblymember Desai, do you want to move your amendment?
Yeah, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Chair, firstly, I would like to thank the London Assembly Greens for bringing forward this motion on what is without question a very important subject, to say the least, a subject that must be addressed. And I'm glad that Assemblymember Barry said that this motion is not our motion, rather, is not an attack on the police, or it's not finger pointing at the police. These are very serious times. Nothing justifies the dramatic increase in assaults upon frontline police officers that we've seen over the last few weeks. They're serious issues. They're going to be debated in a very mature manner. And I wrote to the Commissioner last week to express my concern about the attacks on our officers, and indeed to all my borough commanders as well. But this amendment is necessary because it's also important to acknowledge that progress has been made. And that is why we brought forward this amendment. Recent events have brought to the fore those issues that persist in the relationship between the Met and London's BME communities, and particularly black communities. We know that if you're a black Londoner, you're 4 times more likely to be stopped and searched, 4 times as likely to have a taser used on you, and yet you're far less likely to be a police officer or have a family member within the police. We also know that if you're a black Londoner, you're far more likely to be a victim of violent crime. The police often justify their approach to policing and the disproportionate use of various tactics on the basis of this last point. However, in Britain and in London, we police by consent. And indeed, this is something the Met often say themselves. The level of consent from London's black communities is currently very, very low. A recent ITV poll conducted to mark the 30th anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's murder found that 77% of black people believe that the police has a, quote, culture of racism, unquote. Clearly, that worryingly high figure needs to be addressed if the principle of policing by consent is to be maintained. During the height of the lockdown, there was a steep rise in the use of stop and search, with 1 in 8 young black men in London stopped and searched in the month of May alone. The Met quite simply failed to proactively communicate with black Londoners, and indeed with any of us, why this rise in stop and search was happening and what benefits they sought to use it to bring. I commend the Mayor for acting quickly and undertaking the development and action plan for the Met that aims to address the issue of improving trust and confidence in our police. But I also believe that this is an area where it can and must go further. Unconscious bias training is, I believe, as to many of my colleagues, an important part of the strategy to improve trust and confidence in the police. It will give black Londoners a confidence that Met officers are learning to recognize their own biases and work to avoid them, and through this be sure that they are working to treat black Londoners like any other members of the public they encounter. The reason that I believe, as I said earlier, we should amend this motion is simply this. The Mayor and the Met have already made some significant steps in this area. Approximately 23,000 officers have received unconscious bias training, and it is seen as an integral part of their professional development. I feel we need to acknowledge the progress the Met is making, even though there's still more to do. And that is why I will wholeheartedly support the motion as amended. The Met must go that bit further and ensure that all employees receive unconscious bias training and have their training refreshed at least once every 2 years. Thank you, Chair.
Can I invite Assembly Member Dr. Sahota to second the motion?
Chair, I formally second the motion and reserve my right to speak.
Right, I have one indication so far opening up the debate to the motion, and that is Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I will not be supporting the amendment because, as somebody's already pointed out, is unnecessarily and inaccurately a congratulation of the very poor progress the Mayor has made. It's very simple. If unconscious bias training is so important, then it should be compulsory, and it should be a real part of the development of police officers across London. What I do welcome is the initial motion, because it talks about, Sean was very careful to talk about the fact that this isn't an attack on the police. This is about leadership of the police, and that's why the Mayor has to do more. When we talk about stop and search in London, we constantly talk about the numbers. But what's equally, and if not, or maybe even more important, is the quality of that stop and search. As a young black man who's born and raised in London, I've been stopped by the police a number of times. And the times that it's gone wrong, there has been elements of the officer involved not understanding where I might be coming from or what he or she's unconscious biases may be. This is a very important development and piece of training to help Metropolitan Police officers do better and feel better about the role that they carry out. Stop and search is just one thing that the police have to do, arguably the most controversial thing, and unconscious bias can really help that process. Stop and search is inevitable, it's useful for the police, but it'll be much better if we can have tactics like this, decent, long-term, compulsory training within the professional development of any police officer in London will help everybody. So that's why I think this is an excellent motion. And again, I repeat, I cannot support the addition to the motion because it just congratulates the Mayor for his failure. The Metropolitan Police need support and leadership, and the Mayor is not delivering that.
Thank you. Are there any further members who want to contribute to the debate? No. In that case, can I first invite Dr. Sahota, who reserved his right to speak in favor of amendment?
Thank you, Chair. Unconscious bias is a part of human nature, and Assembly members sitting here aren't exempt from it either. And I think bringing attention to this matter is very important, and I think we need to be very aware of the fact that this is brought in at a time when there's a lot of question about the attitudes of the police force, whether it be on stop and search, whether it be Black Lives Matter. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge that police officers are given training in subconscious bias, and that the progress that has been made. To do so, if not to do so, would mean that we are saying that our police officers haven't been given this training, and that is the cause of some of the criticism against them. I think we need to recognize that good work has been done. Police officers are given this training, but much more needs to be done. And just having given the training, it doesn't mean that that's the end of it. It needs to be refreshed, and we need to be making conscious decisions all the time. And that's why it was important to give a message to Londoners that the Metropolitan Police are being given unconscious bias training, that progress has been made. We accept more needs to be done, and we also need to make sure that this is regularly refreshed. Just having the course once isn't good enough. And therefore I hope that all of you will examine the reasons why you're going to vote, and that it's not your subconscious bias that is asking you to oppose the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Assemblymember Desai if he wants to sum up on his amendment, please? Assemblymember Desai, do you want to sum up on your amendment?
Sorry, Chair,
Sorry, you're muted.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah. I think the case for my colleague Dr. Soth has said.
You're cutting out. Have you finished?
I have.
Okay, thank you. So finally, Assemblymember Barry, you're summing up to the motion, please.
Thank you very much, and some really excellent points have been made by the Assembly members who've spoken about the need for this training, and it isn't unconscious bias that's making me reject the amendment. It's a desire for an accurate reflection of the current picture, and Assemblymember Desai again said that 23,000 officers had received training. This is not the information that we have. The information that we have is that 23,000 officers and staff have received training so far, and out of a total workforce of over 45,000, we cannot be saying as part of our motion that this is good enough, that only 50% of officers and staff have received the training. We have to be asking for acceleration and an improvement in the progress that is being made, not accepting that it's all right. And I hope that the Assembly members will vote down the amendment and that we will pass the strongest possible motion today for this really valuable measure to be as widespread as possible within our police and staff within the Met, because this is such an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. Can we put first the amendment to vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a vote on the amendment to the motion. The amendment is in the name of Assemblymember Desai. I'll call members alphabetically again and they're asked to indicate if they are voting for, against or abstaining. Assemblymember Bacon, your vote, please.
Against.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Berry.
Against.
Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismore.
For.
Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
For.
Assemblymember Gavron.
For.
Sorry, Assemblymember, I didn't hear that. Assemblymember Gavron.
Sorry, I coughed. For.
Thank you. Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
For.
Assemblymember Moore.
For.
Assemblymember O'Connell. Assemblymember O'Connell.
Against, sorry.
Assemblymember Pigeon.
Against.
Assemblymember Prince.
Against.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
For.
Assemblymember Russell.
Against.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
For.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
For.
That is 11 votes in favour, Chair, and 10 votes against, so that amendment is carried.
Can we now move on to vote for the substantive motion as amended?
Thank you, Chair. I'll call members alphabetically again. Assemblymember Bacon.
Against.
Assemblymember Bailey.
Against.
Assemblymember Berry.
For.
Assemblymember Boff.
Against.
Assemblymember Cooper.
For.
Assemblymember Desai.
For.
Assemblymember Dismore.
For.
Assemblymember Duval.
For.
Assemblymember Eshalomi.
For.
Assemblymember Gavron.
For.
Assemblymember Hall.
Against.
Assemblymember McCartney.
For.
Assemblymember Dr Moore.
For.
Assemblymember O'Connell.
Against, sorry, again.
Assemblymember Pigeon. For. Assemblymember Prince.
Against.
Assemblymember Qureshi.
For.
Assemblymember Russell.
For.
Assemblymember Dr Sahota.
For.
Assemblymember Arbour, Deputy Chairman.
Against.
Assemblymember Shah, Chair.
For.
That is 14 votes in favour, Chair, and 7 votes against. That motion is carried.
Right, that concludes all our motions for the morning. Can we move on to item number 6 on mayoral commitment? The Assembly is asked to note commitments made by the Mayor of London, Siddiq Khan, during London Assembly's Mayor's Question Time meeting held between February 2020 and June 2020. Can we agree?
Agree.
Okay.
Agreed.
Delegation to the Chair of the GLA Oversight Committee. The Assembly is asked in relation to urgent matters only to agree a general delegation of authority in respect of the Assembly's powers and functions apart from those that cannot, under the Greater London Authority Act 1999, be delegated to the Chair of the GLA Oversight Committee in consultation with the Deputy Chairman of that committee, party group leaders, Caroline Pigeon, Assembly Member, and any relevant committee chairs from 3rd of September 2020 to 17th of December 2020.
Agreed.
Thank
Agreed.
you.
Agreed.
Last item on the agenda, date of the next meeting. The next meeting of London Assembly is scheduled to be the hybrid meeting of the London Assembly plenary, which will take place on Thursday, 10th of September at 10 a.m. And I haven't been notified of any other business, so pleased to conclude this hybrid meeting. Glad to have members present in the City Hall as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.